we sh we should have time at the end of this to go over some questions, and you can go ahead and put them in the chat in the meantime. And then we'll go over how to get a certificate at the end. And yeah. So in addition to section B, we'll also be looking at parts E, G, and F. And I've just kind of split up the different sections in a way that I think makes sense and just for the amount of time that it might take to go over them. So in case you weren't able to attend yesterday, I have this slide in all of my presentations, but what is the elevation certificate? So this is an official FEMA document that certifies and verifies elevations of different structural aspects that pertain to compliance for floodplain management, which includes federal, state, and local requirements that have been adopted for new structures in the floodplain or for substantial improvement or repair of substantial damage. So this is only for structures. It can be used to support a letter of map change, but it would be just for the structure, not any of the land surrounding it. Like I said, this is required for new or substantially improved structures, which would also include repair of substantial damage, and it must be a finished elevation certificate based on finished construction. There is an under construction option, and that can be useful, but at the end, it would still need the finished certificate. In Kansas, it has to be done by a surveyor or engineer. For the certified elevations, architects are not allowed to do them. And the form is not mandated by FEMA, but it is highly recommended, and there's really no reason not to use it. It has all the information that would be needed to verify compliance, and it is widely used, and it's in all the floodplain ordinances in the state. So once it's certified by a licensed surveyor or an engineer, it does not expire. It can only be validated by changes to the actual structure. As long as it was certified on the valid form at the time of the certification, then it doesn't expire, even if that version of the form expires later on, as long as it was certified on the appropriate form at that time. So who can complete it by section? So yesterday we went over section A, which is just the property information. Anyone can fill that out, just like section B, anyone can fill out the map information. So that's what we'll be looking at first. And then section E, which are additional building measurements, and they are not survey data certified. So these are certain measurements that can be taken by anybody in certain situations, and we'll go over that. Also, section F is the certification for that, the section E measurements. So also that would be anybody that you're certifying that you took the measurements and that they're accurate to your knowledge. And then section G is for the community official, and this is one of the new sections that was added to this version of the form versus the previous form. And so this is something that should be filled out by every floodplain administrator when they get a finished elevation certificate, and it ensures that you have reviewed all of the information, and there's other details that go into that we'll go over. So first for section B, again, that is the mapping section. So you need to look up what the effective mapping information is for your community. So the main way to do that is to go to the FEMA Map Service Center, and you can just search for that, or it's msc.fema.gov, and it will bring you to this home screen. So you can look up an address quickly. If you have a digitized map, you can enter the address and it should be able to pull it up so that you can make a fermet out of it. So that's a smaller version of the map for just one single location, or you can just check on what the base flood status is. It'll give you most of the information that you need for section B. If you need more things than that, the index date, if you need to look at the flood insurance study, or if you need to look at a map change, letter of map change, then you can go to search all products. And when you do that, it will have a list of things um, for you to look up by community specifically. So this is the search result when you use the search bar. So this is the National Flood Hazard Layer. This is FEMA's map viewer for digitized maps. So this pulls up a specific location. In this case, this is our office address in Topeka. So I've just typed in our office address and it pulled it up. And if you click dynamic map, it will generate a map for you. And that gives you all of the information that you would need for that section. Um, so this is what it looks like. It may or may not have the index date. I don't think it does. So you might have to still use the search all products, but this is a quick search and a quick map that can be generated for projects that you're working on with applicants or um, clients, that kind of thing. And this is just how their mapping looks. Different resources will have slightly different formatting, but they're all basically the same. So it does give you the community name and number. It shows you that we're in Zone X. It gives you the panel number and the effective date for that panel, which is most of what Section B asks for. So you would just verify the map information on the elevation certificate. If you're receiving one from an applicant, you just want to make sure that it's all correct. And then you would check the calculation and other aspects of the certificate, but this is something you would typically keep with the approved permit that you issue, and with the other documentation that goes with an approved permit. So this is what happens when you go to the search all products option. It gives you a drop-down list for state, county, and community. So in this case, I've entered Topeka. And again, this is where you can find all of the effective products for the community. There's 158 effective products, so you can click on that. The list opens up and it will give you all of the firm panels and other information. So this is the effective firm panels. This is also what you would have to use if you don't have digital maps. You would have to use this option and then find the appropriate panel and then narrow down the location based on that. So we do have a number of communities in Kansas that still have paper maps that have not been digitalized yet, so or updated for a long time. So this might be something that some of you would have to do. So you can locate the panel using the index map. If you have one of these older maps, so the first product listed here is the index map. So it says CIND, and that's standard for all of them. So the index map shows you basically a map of where all the panels are located and some landmarks to help you narrow down which panel you're looking for. And so this is an older one of Lawrence, and so we have some of those landmarkings. You have the railroad, major highways, some of the larger rivers, and it shows you the city, corporate boundaries. So that's helpful when you have to do it this way. So you can open the appropriate panel that you're looking for. So we're back to Topeka. In this case, if you go through the Map Service Center, search all products and open a panel this way, rather than using the National Flood Hazard Layer, this is what that mapping looks like. So it's a little bit different than the National Flood Hazard Layer. It has an aerial photograph in the background that is black and white, and then you have this kind of blue outline for the floodplain, and that's for all the zones, and then everything that's not drawn is the unshaded zone X. So you can click create a format so that you can just make the small map of your area. So you just choose the page size, hit next, and then select print area. You just drag and drop the green box there over your area of interest. You hit next, you position the scale and north arrows. So on the bottom right, those are in gray. Once those are active, they will also turn green, so you can position them the way that you want, and then you can preview the format and just make sure it's what you want. and then go back and fix it, or you can download it as a PNG or PDF file. And then this is what that looks like. And it's, very straightforward to be able to just, download this and keep it with the project information, um, in addition to the elevation certificate. We also have a state effective viewer. So this is our state-based version of the effective maps that we have. We also have digitized paper maps that can be helpful. So if you have an older paper map that's not currently in the process of being updated, you can look at it on the flood map viewer. But mostly it's for effective DFIRMs, and so that's the link to it at the bottom. This is incredibly useful. It's a lot faster most of the time than the National Flood Hazard Layer, which is nationally based, whereas this is just for Kansas, so it's not as heavily trafficked. There's also a few more features in here that you don't have on the National Flood Hazard Layer that is local, so we include a lot more of the approximate information. You can also measure and draw, and we also have a version of the ferment. So when you look at an area, this is what it looks like. So it's kind of reminiscent of the Map Service Center, but we have different base maps that you can choose from, and then it will just automatically draw in the effective floodplain. So we have all the same information that you saw in the National Flood Hazard Layer with the cross sections and the corporate information, and then of course the actual floodplains themselves. So they are labeled and differentiated by zone. So you can see on the left-hand panel, the legend there shows you the different symbolization for the different flood zones. And so you would open layers, and there you can turn on and off different layers like the map and panel number. There's approximate base flood elevation information for zone A's, which typically don't have that, and they won't have that on the National Flood Hazard Layer. You can search by section, township, and range. You can draw on it. You can measure, which is helpful sometimes when you're calculating things, or the print function there on the bottom left is the creation for the map part. So this is what our version of that looks like. So I've just zoomed into a random area in Topeka, and then you hit print. So it gives you most of the same information as the other ones, but this is just more convenient, I think, and you have more information available than the other options, but any of them work. So this is another area, and I just wanted to show this part because this is the zone A where I've turned on the approximate base flood elevation. And so that can help in determining what that value is, because we have to develop them for zone A construction in the special flood hazard area. So this is helpful for that. You can also see we have future annual chance floodplain. We also have the 500-year floodplain. And so just some of that helpful information. So this is where we are currently by watershed. So we've been making steady progress on getting maps updated as we move through different projects. So we start with the watershed level, and then they get broken down into individual county projects. So this is as of October 29th. So you can see where we are, what's upcoming updates. Those that are in development are in green. Those that have draft maps are in orange. The preliminary stage is in purple, and then LFD, which is basically the final stage, is in blue. And then this is what it looks like at the county level. So just a little bit different information. We do have 2D BLE, which is base level engineering, available statewide. And so this is draft information that does help showcase risk. It might be better information than some of the older paper maps, and we are working towards people being able to adopt that. So this was the statewide BLE initiative. So an initial run in 2D during the discovery phase. So it's statewide flood risk. And like I said, it's not regulatory, but some of them will move towards a regulatory update while others may not. And in that case, like I said, we are working towards developing an ordinance for communities to be able to adopt the BLE data as what's called best available data. So it's not regulatory, but it is informative of the risk, and it can help communities participate in the program. And we should have that finished by the end of June of 2025 so that they can adopt that and participate, and it will help better inform decision making and community planning and emergency response planning. So we're looking forward to having that out and available for people. Like I said, that's mostly for if you don't have a map or your map is severely outdated. And it helps complement effective outdated maps, right? Like I said, and it should be giving additional coverage where the streams on the older maps are not included in the firm data coverage. So just a little bit about that. And that is completed. I think we would probably need to work with communities on an individual basis if you are ever interested in doing this, as it might warrant some further refinements on the base level engineering just to make sure that we are actually providing and regulating to the best available data. So this is section B on the current form. Again, this is 2022 to 2026. That is the like effective date, I guess, in terminology, the dates for this elevation certificate. So it will expire at the end of June of 2026. And as I mentioned yesterday, once that date is passed, then you should be checking for a new form to be released by FEMA so that you make sure that you're using the current form at that time. So the first part, pretty straightforward, NFIP, community name, and then if you are in an unincorporated area of a county, you would enter the county name and then the words unincorporated area according to the instructions for the elevation certificate. The community identification number, so that is the 6-digit number that I showed you for Topeka, and I will show you again on the firm title with that. Sorry, getting a phone call. So I'll show you where to find that on the title panel, and then county name, straightforward, state, and then B4 is the map and panel number. Again, you can find that on the firm title, and then the suffix as well, and I'll explain what that means. If there is an independent city, which is a city that has legally separated from a county or merged with a county that ceased to exist, you can add that terminology. I don't know if we have any in Kansas, but I was just following the instructions in the elevation certificate. And this is all information that really needs to be precise and correct for CRS communities. Otherwise, you will, get marked for error. So there's just something to be aware of. So this is the title panel, and or the title for the panel. So you can find this on all maps, all the updated maps. They look a little bit more updated than this, but they're pretty much the same. So the full map and panel number, it's not where it says panel 192. That is an abbreviation. So you want to make sure that you're getting the full map and panel number, which is towards the bottom there. Circled in red, it's 20177C. So C is for the county-wide, and then 0192, that's the rest of the panel number, and then E is the suffix, and E represents how many times a panel has been updated. So A, B, C, D, E. So this is the fifth revision of this panel. So that's what it's referring to. Um, for the community number, that is right there in the middle of this panel. So for Shawnee County, it's, I think, 200331. Um, all Kansas communities except for Topeka, to my knowledge, start with 200. For some reason, Topeka starts with 205, but all the rest of them are 200. So that's the full numbers that you would need. So again, the 6-digit number goes in B1B, the full map and panel number B4, and then the suffix, which was E, goes in B5. Um, and then you also have the effective date here, so September 29th, 2011. And so that would go into B7. So you would need to go back to the Map Service Center for B6 just for at least the first time you are approving these and reviewing them to make sure what that date is, because the panel and index date are not always the same. There can be partial revisions within a community, within a county, that would change one of the dates. So they're not always the same. Yep. And that's where you'll find it. So the effective date here in this example, this is an older example of Americus. They had updates because the Lyon County had a levy that was remapped. So the panel was updated, the index and the rest of the city, or the rest of the panels did not get updated. So um, just an example where the index is now 2010, but the panel is listed as 2008. So the flood zone, what zone is the site in this structure? That would be on the firm. So we just need to verify what the flood zone is that it's located in. If you have more than one zone, you would list both of them. And, when you're not sure, just be sure to look at the instructions. And then B9 is really one of the most important parts of the elevation certificate in its entirety. So that needs to be calculated using the flood insurance study or other available data for Zone A. And you should not be using the base flood elevations on the firm. Those are rounded, so they shouldn't be used. It needs to be calculated to the nearest tenth of a foot. So if you get an elevation certificate that doesn't have the decimal point, you can assume that it's been rounded or something and that it needs to be corrected. Um, and again, if there's more than one flood zone, then list all appropriate base flood elevations and don't assume that they're correct without checking during your review. You should always be double checking those calculations to make sure that they are reasonable. Um, so if the area where the building is located has a low MAR, then you would include the low MAR effective date and the case number in the comments. If the area where the structure is located was revised by a CLOMA, LOMA, LOMAR F, or CLOMAR F, you would need to add the effective dates and case numbers to section D. So that would be for the certified elevations. If those letters of map change are impacting the structure, then that needs to be listed in the comments by the surveyor or the engineer. So just something else to be aware of, that letters of map change could impact an elevation certificate for sure. So if BLE is used as the data source as best available data, then that should also be noted in the comment section. Yep. And this is all listed in the instructions. If you're not sure, again, just check that out. They're very detailed and they've gone through a lot of revisions to try to avoid mistakes and to make all the needed clarifications. So in this case, we're looking back at the office. Of course, we're in the unshaded zone X, but we're mostly thinking about floodplains here. So you can see plenty of buildings that are actually in the floodplain here. So the crosshatched area in the red and blue, that's the actual floodway. So it'd be the Zone AE floodway is how it would be listed. The adjacent building on the right would be in the AE zone. So it looks like it doesn't intersect the floodway, but it does intersect the zone AE. So that's what would be listed. It does also intersect the 500-year floodplain, which is that orange area that borders the AE zone, but that is not regulatory unless specifically adopted by the community. Um, so that doesn't necessarily have to be listed unless that's one of your regulated areas. That should probably be noted somewhere. The flood insurance study, or FIS, this is the detailed report that accompanies a study. For detailed study areas that have a base flood elevation determined, this gives a full historical background on flooding in the community. The purpose of the FIS, it goes through um, how it was developed and all of the engineering methodology that went into determining the base flood elevations. And so it's a detailed report that gives you that information. And then this is also what would be used to calculate a base flood elevation in a detailed study area. So again, this is under search all products. You find your community effective products, and then underneath the firm panels is the FIS report where it can be downloaded. It's usually in two parts at least. They are quite large files, but most of the information for base flood elevations and elevation certificates are going to be towards the end of that report. That's the where the flood profiles are located, and then this is what you would be checking to make sure that the base flood elevation is correct in the detailed study areas for compliance, to make sure that the new lowest floor is elevated high enough, which is pretty critical because costly mistakes have been made. And so you want to do this early on. Before you get the finished elevation certificate, make sure that they're working with the correct base flood elevation. So this is what the flood profiles look like. So every detailed stream for the riverine floodplain is going to have a flood profile. It might be several pages. So you want to flip to the end of the flood insurance study and then find these pages. And then they're listed by flooding source. So you want to make sure that you've found the right stream and the right areas. So you can identify the areas by the landmarks that are written here. So it has different streets or culverts and that kind of thing, as well as the cross sections that are labeled there, so that you know you're in the right area, you have the right flood profile. So this is what needs to happen in a detailed area for AE zones to ensure that it's accurate and reasonable for the location. So you can also see the static base flood elevations for the cross sections that are in the summary uh, flood data table. So there are data tables that list what the regulatory base flood elevation is for the different cross sections. And the cross sections are just points in the stream where the exact base flood elevation has been calculated. And so when you have those two numbers, your locations in between whichever two cross sections, you would determine what the base flood elevation is based on the exact location of the structure and determining what the difference is between the two cross sections, depending on where it's located. Right, so you have the 100-year frequency there. So the maps, you have the different flood frequencies. So the arrow on the left is pointing to the 100-year stream or frequency. So that's what we regulate to and what we would be measuring for the base flood elevation. You also have the other frequencies for the 500-year, the 10%, the 10-year, 50-year, So we don't typically need those, just the 100 year. And so then you have your lettered cross sections and you would just determine that. So you don't have to be a surveyor or an engineer to be able to do this. It's basically a graphical representation of those flood frequencies so that we can use them. And the engineering work has already been done. We're just interpreting that information to determine what the base flood elevation is for our location. Um, okay. So if you want to have a full demonstration of this, we do have calculating a base flood elevation recording that you can reach through either our YouTube channel or the link to the YouTube video is also on our training page and it goes through. This is a 30-minute video. It's a very simple process. It might just take a little bit of practice, but it's really not that difficult. And so you want to check your work with the floodway data tables. So like I said, you're just pinpointing your location between the two cross sections. How far away is it from the downstream cross section? And then where it lands on the flood profile, you would just measure all the way up to that 100-year intersection where your property intersects with the 100-year line, and then just go straight across to the left and it will tell you what the base flood elevation is. And that's what is covered in that video. Um, and then you can come back to the floodway data tables. You can find the two cross sections that you were using for that flooding source, and then go across and look at what the regulatory numbers are for those two cross sections and make sure that your base flood elevation falls in between those two numbers. If you got something outside of that range, it's definitely wrong and you should go back and check your work. I've made a mistake where I was just looking at the wrong stream. And so, just making sure you have the right one. They sometimes have similar names and that kind of stuff. And then that would be the official base flood elevation. So this is usually done by surveyors. It should be double checked by the floodplain administrator. And if you want to, you can authoritatively bump it up like 1/10 of an inch or something like that, just to make sure that it's actually elevated high enough. Just considering how old your map is, you might want to put like an extra like 1/10 of an inch just in case for that lowest floor. It's not that expensive to raise a floor a couple tenths of an inch if it couple tenths of of a foot before it's built. So that's just something to consider. Um, right. Okay. So I covered everything. And then I was going to say something else. Okay. So having an incorrect base flood elevation can really impact a project. There are, different ways that this could happen, but this is an older case that we had where the surveyor used one of the rounded base flood elevations on the firm at 1277. So you can see it's not to 1/10 of a foot, and it clearly was not calculated. They also used a downstream number from the project site. So we're always using the highest number that could impact the structure. And that's why we measure from the upstream cross section. Um, so we're always trying to take the highest number for the base flood elevation. And then when they did actually calculate it, it was 1279.2. And they had the lowest floor at 1278.1. So it's above the downstream rounded number, but not the actual base flood elevation. And it was actually 1.1 feet too low. So that's a violation that would have to be corrected, meaning the lowest floor needs to be elevated. And so you don't want to end up in that situation where you have to tell a property owner that they have to, elevate an existing structure, which is very expensive. So that's why it pays to double check these things and make sure that you're getting the correct information. So B10 is the source of the base flood elevation data or the flood depth. So that's for a shallow flooding zone. Um, so the source or depth, if the source is anything other than the flood insurance study, the firm or the community, then you would indicate the name of the study, company, agency, and the date of that study. So sometimes there's not data available, and so we can usually deal with that with the technology, the data that we have now statewide. But there's also other studies that could be utilized, like KDOT may have calculated that base flood elevation if they had a project nearby. So when you use the data from the DWR website to interpolate that, um, you should identify that on the form so you can have us as the resource for that. That's what happens when we use the BFE portal. We end up being the source for that. So we often calculate base flood elevations for zone A's and other things. So I will show you that. So this is the Kansas Base Flood Elevation Portal. So this is a site that we have that is free to use. So you can register for an account, and then for any site in the state, we can calculate a base flood elevation where data is available for Zone A floodplains, and that's, I think, the most common use. You can also request a model for an area for a county. And then we can also assist with detailed study determinations if you're using the FIS for an AE zone area. So we also have LiDAR that you can click around and look at. So this will give you the approximate base flood elevation and the approximate lowest adjacent grade for anywhere that we have LiDAR data. And so this is something that we often give to property owners when they're not sure if they would qualify for a LOMA or something like that. They can go look at their structure and get an approximate idea of what those two values are to determine if it's worth the money to get a survey to try and apply for a LOMA. We do calculate these individually. There's detailed instructions under the Help tab, and then you don't have to submit a request to look at the LiDAR data. That's just kind of a point and click thing. So when you do submit a request, you go to the map. Uh, that's kind of what it looks like. It's regulatory floodplain. So zone A is all that's highlighted in there. The detailed study areas, it says consult the flood insurance study. That's usually what we start out with. And then if you just clarify that you need assistance with the detailed study, then we can do that. And then you draw the property. So you use the drawing tool and then draw a polygon around your area of interest. So you want to trace the boundary of the structure using the aerial imagery as your guide as shown below. So you want to be as precise as possible. And then once you're done drawing, a pop-up box comes up that asks you about the address and what the purpose of your request is. And so the purpose of your request helps us to determine what the best approach is to calculating the base flood elevation. And then you hit save, and then you get a note that we'll be in touch. So it's very simple. And we may reach out with clarifying questions as well. And then once we get to the endpoint, if we're filling out an actual request for the zone A, then we have this letter generated that will tell you what data we ended up using and what the approximate lowest adjacent grade is and the base flood elevation. So this has been used in support of elevation certificates as well as LiDAR-based LOMAs if there's at least a 2-foot difference between the lowest adjacent grade and the base flood elevation. And so we've helped people in that way. So this is a very handy resource for floodplain administrators, surveyors, and property owners. That's just a close-up of some of the language that we use. So this shows you where we have data. This may have been updated, but I know we have statewide base flood elevation or base level engineering. We also have a map viewer that shows you the letters of map change. Uh, so they aren't outlined by like the meets and bounds description. That would be helpful, but we at least have each LOMA is listed. Um, the areas where there is a low MAR are actually mapped out, but you can see the list of letters of map change. We even have the rejections that are listed on there. Um, so this is a handy website to look at where there's effective letters of map change or where someone may have applied and was denied their letter. Um, so it's just another helpful resource that we have that's available through our site. Um, and then the elevation data for B11, the datum for the base flood elevation, we have NAVD 88, and then which is more commonly used, it's more updated than the NGVD 29, but that might be in some of the older maps. So you need to list what the datum is and make sure that it's correct because it's very apples to orange comparison between the two. In Emporia, the difference could be 4/10 of a foot or 4.8 inches, which is close to like a 5-inch difference. So if you remember the example that I showed you with the rounded base flood elevation, if that rounded number was used and the wrong datum was used, you could have an additional 5 inches off and be like a 1.5 feet too low. Something like that. So you want to look at section C and make sure that the base flood elevation datum and the survey shots are in the same datum. They can be converted, and there's like software that's used. It used to be NCAT, and well, anyways, it's all hosted by the Geodetic Survey, and so lines B12 and 13, you'd want to hit no for this. And so this is another update that they did to this form where you can say yes or no. And it used to be just like yes, or it was left blank. So obviously it's always going to be no. In Kansas, we don't have coastal barrier resources systems, or it have anything that's seaward of the LIMWA. So we don't have those features, so just make sure that they're checked off as no for both. Otherwise, it would be considered an error if you're in CRS, or you shouldn't accept it as a floodplain administrator, anyways. So just some common mistakes that we see in this section. The abbreviated panel number, like I said, there is an abbreviation, but it needs to be the full map and panel number. The suffix area is left blank. The dates for firm or the panel could be incorrect. The flood zone determination from a bank. Yeah, that needs to come from the firm. Banks can be for sure wrong when they have determinations done. They usually have a third party doing that, and it's not always accurate. They're not usually just people looking at it. It's generated by a computer that looks more at property lines than the actual structure, so there could be a mistake there. Using obviously the rounded base flood elevation from the firm instead of doing the actual calculation, and then having B12 left blank when it should be checked off as no. Finding a surveyor, the KSLS website is a good place to get started. They're listed by counties. So we often give this to property owners, and I send it to floodplain administrators as well. It's a great resource for everybody. Since they're all listed by counties and where they provide services, and that way they have an idea of how much they would have to pay for someone to drive to them, depending on where they're located. If they have experience doing flood elevation certificates, if they've taken any training with the state. And it helps people be a smarter consumer, looking at the pricing and timing, and the scheduling for getting a survey done, because it could take a while, and you don't want to wait until the end where you're getting to a foreclosure or something like that. It's not something that can be done in the same day usually. Of course, there's very detailed instructions for each and every line that will help you work through any issues that you're having. This is great for troubleshooting stuff. It's helpful for surveyors, applicants, and reviewers. So Section E is for the property owner in AO zones. So that's one of the shallow flooding zones that I mentioned. It's for compliance purposes. It says A zones as well, but in Kansas, we have to calculate those, so they don't go in this section. This is for only AO zone use. And AO zones have a flood depth. So the lowest floor must be elevated above the highest adjacent grade, at least as high as the depth number on the firm, or at least 2 feet if no depth number is specified. And you'll find that same language in your floodplain ordinance. And so the floodplain administrator goes and certifies compliance when there is no depth number for floodplain management uses. And now the form distinguishes between natural grade, which is undisturbed natural surface of the ground prior to any excavation or fill. If it's not on natural grade, then you would explain that in the comments of section F. So there's a comment section for this section E where you certify. And we're not mapping these as much anymore. We're trying to phase them out. So this is newer to this form versus the previous one. So what are the measurements based on? Again, we're looking at finished construction for the most part, but it could be under construction when you're doing your inspections of ongoing work. But still, again, the finished certificate is needed. So this is what it looks like. Again, it gives you a little bit of information to use natural grade if available. It can be supported for a letter of map change, and always use feet. Meters are only for Puerto Rico. So there it is, the finished construction or under construction, what it's based on. And then you provide the measurement. The top of the bottom floor is either above or below the highest adjacent grade, and the top of the bottom floor is either above or below the base flood elevation for the highest adjacent grade and lowest adjacent grade. And then for diagrams 6 through 9, so those are the ones that have an enclosure. You're looking at the next higher floor above the enclosure, the attached garage, what the height of that is, and then the top of the platform for any machinery or equipment servicing this building. And then this is also new. If there's no depth number available, is the top of the bottom floor elevated in accordance with your ordinance? So yes or no on that. And then the local official certifies that information in section G. So this is new to make sure that you've checked whether or not, in Kansas, at least 2 feet if no depth number is given, and that's just the national standard. So this is where you certify that, you just have your information, and then any comments, like I said, that you would need to add for that section. And then this is section G, another completely new section on this version of the form. It's used by the local official, and you can, use this for compliance, basically. So you could fill this out where you're taking information from section C that was signed and sealed by a surveyor. And then 2A, you indicate if you're taking measurements for a property owner in section E, so you can help them by doing the measurements that you need, and then put that in here. For section 2B, H is for insurance purposes, so I'll be going over that tomorrow. Three is for making any corrections to the A, B, E, and H sections. And then four, the following information is for floodplain management purposes. And then in that case, they want the permit information, the date of certificate of occupancy, when that was issued, and if it was for new construction or substantial improvement. Um, they also ask about if a variance was issued in that case. So you would fill that out. And then um, it's not really an optional part of it. They say recommended, which is strongly means, you kind of have to do it. So G9A, elevation of as-built lowest floor of the building, including a basement. So they ask for that, make sure the datum is in there, and then elevation of bottom of as-built lowest horizontal structure. So that, I think that one is optional if you take that measurement. Okay. And then G10 would be for the AO zone if there's a flood depth instead of a base flood elevation. And then for G10, uh, what the community's minimum elevation or depth is, that requirement for the lowest floor or the lowest horizontal structural member, that gets added. And then G11 is to verify whether a variance was issued. And if so, describe that in the comments and attach that documentation. So they want to make sure that you're issuing appropriate variances and what it was for, why it was issued, that kind of thing. And then the local official certifies this section. Make sure to include your email address and then any comments that would go in there. So other than that, we also have our NFIP resources page. So we have templates and handouts here. You'll find that video that I mentioned here to calculate the base flood elevation and just other resources. And with that, we have some time for questions. I will stop sharing and chat. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Well, while we do that, Keegan, can you launch the poll? Okay, so this just lets me know if you want a certificate, whether or not you're a CFM. I'm happy to send that. I'll also be sending out the um, follow-up survey as well as the slides and some of the resources that I mentioned today. Okay, hopefully everyone has had a chance to respond to that. So I guess we can stop the recording.